Hi, my name is Jerry, and I'm a grateful compulsive overeater. Grateful to know that it's a disease, not a moral issue. And I need to say that my higher power, which I choose to call God, used my higher power at the time to get me to OA. Um, I was on the Navy's weight control program for 6 years. The first time I had to lose 40 pounds. Second time I had to lose 55 pounds. And the third time I had to lose 67 pounds, but I couldn't do it at the time. So the Navy sent me to treatment for chronic obesity and truly grateful for that. And I remember when I first came in, I would go to meetings and people would say, I'm a grateful compulsive overeater. And I'd look at myself and say, boy, are they insane? And then what I learned was they were grateful because they had a solution to their disease of compulsive eating. Um, so And that was in November 1986. My current abstinent date is October 16th, 2001. And that's all about God and OA. Um, my first 10 years in OA were like a honeymoon. And that's because my sponsor, he helped me get into service. And basically what he did was, I remember I asked him to sponsor me. And he said, are you willing to go to any lengths? And in my mind, I said no, but what came out was yes. So then he said, okay, you will need to call your food in daily. You will need to go to at least 3 meetings a week, and you will make 3 outreach phone calls a day. So then in my mind, I'm thinking, I need to find a way to get out of this. So I said to him, I got to get up pretty early in the morning and go to work. And he said, that's okay. Call me at 5:30 a.m. So, and he was such a blessing to me because his motto was 3 strikes, you're out. And that means if you didn't do 3 assignments, then he would release you to more recovery. So what I know for myself is when we got through the first step, I was still struggling with the disease part. But when we got to the second step, and the assignment was name 5 instances in your life where you were insane around food. And of course, I said to my sponsor, only 5? Anyway, um, but when we got to the third step, that's when I rediscovered the God that's in my life today, my higher power. Because in the beginning, I told my sponsor, I'm really angry with God. God didn't do anything for me. And he said, not to where I'll give you God you can do business with. I said, oh, yeah, what God is that? He said, good order and discipline. And I thought, I'm a military guy. Maybe I could do that. But it worked out very well. Also, when we got to the third step, one of the requirements was to memorize the third step prayer. And I didn't do it. And I called him up and I said, I started reading it to him from the book. And he said, I need to stop you right there, Jerry. I said, why? He said, because you can't BS a BSer. Memorize the prayer and call me back. So then we got on to the fourth step. Um, it only took me a few months to do it, but it took me about a year to feel comfortable enough with my sponsor. I would share it with him. And so I did ended up sharing with him on a Saturday in Balboa Park. And when it was over, he stood up, I stood up. And my first thought, not the most macho thing I could be doing today, because he gave me a hug. But my second thought was, I just told him all my garbage and he loved me anyway. And then he said, now you can do 6 and 7. And I said, you mean I don't get the weekend off? And he said, does your disease take the weekend off? So I knew that I would be working on 6 and 7. So, and when we got to 6, I called him up and I said to him, I didn't do the assignment. And he said, why? And I said, because I'm not willing. And he said, screw the willingness, get the assignment done and call me back. So I did. Very grateful for that. And I knew I only had one more strike left, so I did all the assignments after that. So the way he was the chairman of the intergroup. So the way he got me involved in intergroup was he said, hey, Jerry, you know that men's breakfast meeting you go to? I said, yes. He said, do they have an intergroup rep? I said, no. And he said, they do now. And then at intergroup, they talked about Region 2. And I said, what's that? And he says, oh, it just means that you're on the service board and intergroup. So you get to come to meetings twice a month. So I thought, yeah, I could do that. Well, at the time, he failed to mention that there were 3 in-person assemblies a year. And then at that time in San Diego, we had over 130 in-person meetings. So we were allowed to have 13 delegates at World Service. And he said to me, hey, Jerry, how would you like to go to World Service? And I knew it wasn't really a question. So I said, I'd love to go. And so we went to World Service together. And I had an opportunity to meet Roseanne. And the first year I went to World Service, she addressed the fellowship and she said, my vision of OA was only for compulsive overeaters. And so after she addressed the fellowship, the service body spent about 6 hours debating Tradition 3 and came up with, you're a member if you say you are a member. But the following year, she came back and addressed the fellowship again. And she said, I just want the fellowship to know that my vision of OA was limited. God's vision of OA is unlimited. Therefore, it's for anybody who has an eating disorder. And all of a sudden, this little lady who was like 4 feet 11 tall was like an 18-foot giant. So basically what that taught me was, if I make a mistake, I can make amends and correct it. So my first 10 years in OA were like a honeymoon, basically because I was heavily involved in service. And then basically I started taking my will back and I lost my abstinence. And so I was on and off abstinent for about 4 years. Then I broke down and got a sponsor and we started working the steps again. And that was October 16th, 2001. And the first year at World Service, we did the 12 steps. And I said to my sponsor, how come they don't do the steps and the traditions together? And my sponsor said, OA has no opinion on outside issues, but everybody in OA has their own opinion. So I don't think we'd be able to agree. So anyway, in the beginning, they had this book. It's called Overeaters Anonymous. And my sponsor used to have me write on all my books, Jerry is a loving child of God, because I didn't think I was one when I came. And the other thing he had me do was on my literature put, God is love and OA is life. And OA did give me a life greater than my dreams. And basically, this book here is, I was introduced to it when I was on H&I, and the chair of the H&I committee said, everybody has to own a Brown book. And so I said to her, does that mean I got to read it too? And she said, yes, Jerry, you need to read it. But I'm grateful she did, because I read Appendix A, which is in the first edition, and it said the thing that stuck out was the remarkable thing about OA's success is that the program gets people to function far better than they ever have in their lives. With any other disease, you're lucky to get back to where you were. If you had a heart attack, for example, you're fortunate to get your heart to function as well as it did before the attack. With the compulsive overeater, not only do you get back to a normal weight, but more importantly, your life is changed, and in a sense, you're ahead of where you were before you became a compulsive overeater. You now have the tools of feeling, touching, caring, loving, sharing, being honest with your family, and looking at life in an understanding way and not fighting it, but going along with it. Once you treat the illness, you have the potential for a more together person than you were. Therefore, it's exciting for physicians and others who've been ignoring the problem or expressing deep pessimism about it to think of compulsive overeating as a disease and to realize it can be so successfully created. And the 12 and 12, I think it's on the second edition. They changed things a little bit. And what I I'll what I'll say about change is I'm not always the first to receive it gracefully. Anyway, the reason I mention that is when they went from the third edition of the big book to the fourth edition, they moved acceptance is the answer, which was on page 449, to 417. And I called my sponsor and I said to him, those drunks, they changed it. They changed 449 to 417. And my sponsor said, not to worry, Jerry. They left the resentment prayer on 552 just for you. So out of the second edition of the 12 and 12 on page 20, the definition of abstinent has been redefined over the years as the OA Fellowship has clarity on the meaning of abstinence for all our members. It's important to remember that abstinence is not the exact content of our plan of eating, which we each are responsible to determine and follow as we surrender to our higher power's guidance. Nor is abstinence about what we weigh, although abstaining and maintaining a healthy body weight is a result of our abstinence. Abstinence is about refraining from compulsive eating and compulsive food behaviors that create the obsessive thinking and destructive acting out with food. A plan of eating helps us each day to get and remain abstinent. Food plans may change over time as circumstances change, or we may discover new or different foods or behaviors from which we must abstain. And I'm glad you read out of 4 today. I always consider it the greatest piece of literature ever written. And there's several days that are close to my heart, but I'll just go to October 16th because it really helped me to understand that it was a disease. And it goes, how shall we expect charity towards others when we're uncharitable to ourselves? Sir Thomas Browne. The injustice we aptly do ourselves was expressed by a member who said, If someone treated me the way I treat myself, I would sue. I wouldn't let anybody beat up on me the way I beat up on myself. And that was the other thing my sponsor did for me is he said, okay, Jerry, if you insist on beating yourself up, I'm taking away the chains and whips and I'm going to leave you with a feather. So, um, just truly grateful for that. And so what I know today is that thanks to God in this program, I'm an abstinent member of OA. It helped me be a better husband, a better father, a better human being. Um, when I went to treatment, I was there for 6 weeks. When I came back to the ship, a new guy had checked on board. And after about 2 weeks, he said to me, hey, Chief, I don't understand it, but everybody in the division seems to be afraid of you. And I just chuckled because before he came on, I had no mercy. They had to do everything correctly. And if they didn't, I would peel their skin back. Okay. But OA helped me to learn not to take myself so seriously and that it's okay. We're all here just to learn and live a peaceful, beautiful life. And so it had changed that part in me where I thought I had to beat people up to get them to do work. And the other thing is what I learned from step 7 in the AA 12 and 12. And I'll just read it real quick. It's on page 76. And it really helped me to understand that I was just another one of God's children, okay? And it goes, the chief activator of our defects has been self-centered fear, primarily fear that we would lose something we already possess or we would fail to get something we demanded. Living upon a basis of unsatisfied demands, we were in a state of continual disturbance and frustration. Therefore, no peace was to be had until we could find a means of reducing these demands. The difference between a demand and a request is plain to anyone. And the reason I mention that is that when my daughter was 13, I said to her, go do the dishes. And she said, Dad, I just need you to know I'm not one of them sailors that work for you. You have to ask me nice. So I said, would you please go do the dishes? And then a few weeks later, when her mom was at work, she came running downstairs and she said, Dad, I'm bleeding. And I said, just a minute. I called my sister Ruthie and said, please talk to my daughter because what I learned in program is if I don't have the answer, I need to find somebody who does. And I don't be BSing anymore.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to walk through some of my pictures. Okay. Uh, well, maybe I am. um, anyway, um, I just wanted to
Maybe
show
please double
you
click.
that what I looked at 267 pounds is this big guy here. What I did before treatment was I used to beat my body into shape by uh, running 10Ks. And then at 16, until I was in the late 20s, I always ate if I was awake, but the weight didn't stay on until I got in my late 20s. And the other thing I learned from OA was on January 19th, which just happens to be OA's birthday. because God has a sense of humor and he's always there to help us not take ourselves so seriously. And for today, I'll let no one, including myself, try to shame me into changing something I wish were different about myself. I pray to be relieved of the guilt and self-hate and to accept and like myself exactly as I am. And that's where I can begin to change. I'm grateful for my sponsor who used to have me write myself love notes. And in the beginning, they were real simple. Dear Jerry, went to a meeting. Love, Jerry. But over time, they advanced to, Dear Jerry, today I know that you're a loving child of God, and you will carry that message to another loving child of God, so they too will learn to love themselves the way God does, unconditionally. And, like I said, I have a life beyond my wildest dreams, and that's thanks to OA. And then I'll just throw this in there to say that 5.5 years before the Navy sent me to treatment for chronic obesity, they sent me to treatment for alcoholism. So as you see, my higher power, God, used the Navy to help me with my diseases. And that's why I'm here today. And with that, I'll say, thank you for letting me share. And one, what I do is I have 3 meals a day and I allow myself to have 2 snacks. My snacks need to be between breakfast and lunch or lunch and dinner. And the reason for that is that early in my recovery, I called my sponsor and it was about 10 p.m. and I said, I just want to eat. And he said to me, no one's ever died of starvation between dinner and breakfast. You're going to be okay. And so after my dinner meal, I don't have anything else. Okay. And so that's pretty much the way I do it today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we want to close? Any other people want to say something?
I think it was good.
Yeah. All right. Cool. By following the 12 steps, attending meetings regularly, and using the OA tools, we are changing our lives. You will find hope and encouragement in Overeaters Anonymous. Okay. The opinions expressed here today are those of individual OA members and do not represent OA as a whole. Please remember our commitment to honor each other's anonymity. Whom you see here, what you hear here. When you leave here, let it stay here. Here. Let us all reach out by phone or email to everybody. Together we get better.